Shabbat Shalom.
So this is a special one-time adult ed component that'll probably finish up at about 11, and then we'll take a quick coffee refill and jump back into Joshua. So this is a program about God, and its purpose is to help us to better articulate our own theologies, to help us use the names of God from our own tradition as a starting point, really, to work on our own relationship with God and what that means, and what is possible for our relationship with God, and what is not possible for our relationship with God. And what we'll see is that even among the most traditional views of Judaism, there are various and often contrasting views of God. And if you look around the room, you'll see that there are these signs, and that's going to be the basis of like the first probably 20 minutes or so of what we're doing. And it'll involve some moving around, it'll involve some writing on the signs, and then we'll come back, and after we've sort of been jazzed up by the first part of exploring how we connect to these names, we'll come back and talk about God for a little while, and what we think and what we believe or can't relate to or feel alienated from. And the last thing I'll say, sort of as a way of introduction, is that all of these names are from three sources in Jewish tradition, either directly from the Bible or from the rabbinic period and rabbinic writings like Mishnah and Talmud, or from liturgy. And the liturgy ones are some of the later ones. But all in all, this is all very early stuff. There's nothing here that's modern or postmodern or post-enlightenment even. This is all very early stuff. So even everything that we do today is still just sort of a drop in the bucket of what Judaism has had to say about God over the last several thousand years, because there is there's a lot of stuff out there. So these are, I have written down 15, but I think there's actually 16 different names for God on the wall. So I'm just going to read through them real quick. They're not in the order that I'm about to read them. Wasn't that coordinated this morning.
Is this sort of like Jewish graffiti?
It's going to be. There's going to be two parts. So the first part is I'm going to present a series of situations, of life situations. Some of them are rather extreme, some of them are more mundane, but we're going to hear a situation, think about it, and then go and stand by the name of God that we would relate to the most in that situation. Okay, and I did not put up a sign that says like none, but if none of these would connect with you, then there's a really excellent coat hanger rack blank wall over there, so that could be our none wall. But here are the names, and I put them in transliteration and in English. I've got a new computer, and I still haven't been proactive to get my Hebrew font set up. So Tsuri is on there, which means my rock, which is usually related to a source of strength and stability. And Goali, my redeemer. Hoshea, Savior, the idea of God as an external source of salvation, has always existed in Judaism. I mean, that's part of what Passover is all about. Avinu is on there, and I put that as parent. I left the Hebrew gender, and I didn't put like Avinu and like Imanu for mother. I just put Avinu, and the English is all non-gendered, except for Lord, which I know that's technically gendered, but it doesn't sound gendered in my head. But when you think of Lord, just think, like Master, which I know is also gendered. But aside from that, I didn't use any gendered language, and I don't want that to, because I didn't want that to be something we get caught up in, whether, is it motherliness or fatherliness? Just think parentalness. Adonai Tzebaot, Lord of Armies. I'll be impressed if someone wants to go stand over there, but that's a big identity that God has in the Bible. Malkeinu as the ruler. Haboreh, the creator. El Shaddai, which doesn't really directly translate that well, but it's more or less the Almighty. It's a sort of all-powerful name from the Bible. Adonai, Lord. Elohei Avotenu, God of our ancestors. That's sort of part of God that connects us with our ancestors in the Bible, with our ancestors in the rabbinic period, with our ancestors in the medieval period, with our ancestors in Russia, with our ancestors who were in every stage of Jewish history. Shekhinah is a pretty major one. It's God's presence. It's that when people will often talk about transcendence and immanence, immanence with an A, as my professors always say, meaning that God is close to us. That's where the Shekhinah comes in. El Roi, which is the shepherd, sort of caretaker, and it's really funny because when you look at the transliteration, I initially had let's see, where is that? I don't know if you can see it from here.
It'll be down the
It's down there.
Because they've been in the orders that you.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. So, El Roi, you'll notice there's an apostrophe between the O and the I. Well, I initially didn't have that apostrophe, and then one of my classmates saw it and said, Elroy from the Jetsons. So it is not Elroy from the Jetsons, it is El Roi, the divine shepherd.
What's a shepherd?
The sheep guy.
Oh, that's with an H.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you'll have to forgive my misspellings and Microsoft's sheep herd.
Oh.
It makes so much more sense now.
Yes.
Okay, well, please forgive me on that. Ha'olam, the Eternal One, it's a rabbinic name. Hamakom, also a rabbinic name, has to do with God's omnipresent quality. And the last one, which I was not going to include and became the 16th, is the Tetragrammaton. I did not put it up there in the Hebrew. I wouldn't have really felt comfortable even if the Hebrew had been working. But YHVH, the Tetragrammaton, this nameless name that has to do with being and the verb in Hebrew to be. This is when Moses is at the burning bush and asks what he should say to the Israelites when they want to know what the name of this God that Moses spoke to is, and God responds with this sentence, I am that I am, which Popeye had.
Well, I was going to say, plain part of Popeye.
Absolutely.
I am what I am.
So I decided to put that up there, even if it's possibly the most ethereal and least grounded name. It's the original name, so I thought it deserved to be up there. So those are the names, and let's just get right into it. These situations in our real lives may or may not cause us to think about God immediately or upon reflection later in life on those experiences. But for this program, take it there. Take it to the struggle. Take that situation to your relationship or non-relationship or whatever it is with God, and then find a name that best represents that relationship or that struggle. And the last word of introduction I'll say is that some of these may hit close to home, and that's not intentional and that's not the real purpose of this program, but if it does hit close to home, that's not necessarily a bad thing for this program, to really come from a less imagined place than a place from experience. So, I'll read out a situation. We will all stand up and mill about, find the one that we like, and stand next to it. We won't really be discussing in this part. We're just going to be standing, looking sort of how we're spread across the room, but it's more for ourselves. It's more for ourselves. So for our first situation, you were in an accident and went to the hospital. After emergency surgery, the doctor has just told you that you only have a few hours left to live. So, bad accident, emergency surgery, and you have a few hours left. Now, let's stand up and find which name speaks to you the most for that situation.
How can I stand in front of all of them?
Yeah, right.
say, how can we stand in front of all of them?
All right, for the next situation, your daughter and son-in-law have been trying to have a baby for years, fighting complex medical issues. Finally, they just had their first child, and you're holding your first grandchild, looking into his eyes. It's a bit of a girl, is what I'm going to too. For the next situation, your spouse has come down with an illness that she's been fighting for months, but she's not getting better. The doctors are extremely pessimistic, but they propose a high-risk new surgery. Miraculously, the surgery is successful and your spouse makes a complete recovery. All right, next situation, moving away from hospital stuff. You've been hiking in the Negev desert on a plateau for days, and you've seen nothing but the same brown flatness in all directions. At the end of the third day, you come across a breathtaking view of a massive canyon exploding with colors of oranges, yellows, and reds as the sun sets on the opposite side of the canyon. Now, it doesn't refer to the place at that canyon.
No.
Okay.
Well, if you're,
God is the
I'll be
place of the
between
work.
these.
Right.
All right. Our next one, you're sitting in services, it's Erev Yom Kippur, and you're listening to a cellist play Kol Nidre. All right, the next situation. Your favorite team just won the NCAA tournament / the Super Bowl / the World Series.
Same thing?
Yay, team!
Sorry, I can't.
Joshua Bell just got the Nobel Prize.
All right, this is the last scenario. You are at a romantic dinner, and you make eye contact with your loved one, and you share this beautiful moment of wordless connection. You'll have to get in line, sorry. All right, excellent. Let's all just remain standing because the next part is going to involve standing as well. So I hope that in addition to sort of being forced to decide on your own, it was kind of cool seeing how for some of these questions, people were spread literally from one end of the room for the other. But for others of the questions, we're literally like, is anyone not standing at the checking box? I mean, for some of them, here we are. So for some of them, there have been very large groups with like 1 or 2 or 3 people here and there. But for others, it's been literally from one end to the other. And these are all, these are all valid, traditional Hebrew names for God. So the next part, come on, everybody come on over here and take one pin of each color.
Oh, okay.
This is where we get to sort of rate God. It's going to be fantastic. So the next part of what we're going to be doing is we each have a red pen and a blue pen. With the blue pen, you don't have to write on them all. You don't have to write on any certain number of them, but as many as you feel like. Let's take about 10 minutes for this.
We each need a blue pen.
We each need a blue pen too. So with the blue pen, we will write on these pages, let's see, how did I word this because I want to say it right. Associations that name brings up for us that we believe. Or things that name bring up in us that help us connect to God. So, for example, I'm just going to be really obvious here because I want everyone to be really sort of on board because this is sort of a very different from what we were just doing. For the blue pen, I might go up to the Shekinah page and write special connections with people in blue. Because for me, I consider special connections with people, or actually connections with people in general, to be a holy thing. And if I had to tie myself down to a name of God that connected to what that holy moment was, it would be Shekinah. So, for the red pen, we are writing associations that the name brings up that we do not believe in. Or that associations that name bring up that actually block us from connecting with God, that present like a stumbling block for our own connection. So I might write, I actually, and this is me speaking very personally and not as some sort of voice of Judaism that I don't even have to begin with. If I went to Hamoshiach, to Savior, I would actually write down in red, necessary third party for salvation or something like that. Because even though it's a very Jewish idea, I have a hard time, it speaks to my age, speaks to my own experience, I have a hard time accepting that there are situations that I can't save myself from, or I can't, use my, the resources around me to save myself from, and that God has to be a part of that process. So for me, that's something that, if I was presented with that theology, would alienate me. So red are things that alienate you, that you don't agree with, that you don't believe, that you struggle against, it's a rather blasé way of putting it, but that you don't like. And the blue pen is for things that you relate to. Things about a name that help you connect with God. Things about a name that give you an avenue into a theology that you can really jive with and sync up with, and it give you access to the divine in Judaism. Okay, are there any questions on this?
Many, but myself.
Okay, I guess the most important thing is that there are no right or wrong answers here. Okay, Judaism is about the struggle and it's about the conversation, and this is our own struggle and our own conversation. Okay, so this is personal. There's no grading system from me or from God, unless you think there is a grading system from God, in which case you might write that down. So let's go ahead and start, and let's take about 10 minutes to do this. Questions are fine, too. They don't have to be statements. This is something that just sort of occurred to me because I saw something that someone else had written that resonated with me. If you find something that someone else wrote that resonates with you, put like an asterisk or a star or a check by it. Which color did you?
I think I unplugged something.
Oh, I got it.
Okay.
Oh, that'll be hard to write on. Let's move it.
And I always wondered why Adonai that I can say, but if it's a group of us, it would be Adonai. Right?
Yeah.
Well, this is proving that we all learned how to write at least.
Yes, it is. Look for
Some of us better know literature than others.
This really aims at plural. Hold on.
Yeah. Governing from Chicago.
I don't know. I'm not asking that today.
If you write with your left hand,
Oh, you guys.
every president except Harry Truman was left hand. Pardon me?
He meant the country.
Yeah.
She meant PBS.
Oh, he was the president of the whole country.
Well, I
June
don't know.
6th, board meeting. A whole
Sure.
congregational meeting. My blue thing just wore out.
Wow.
Or it got tired of being on horizontal.
Well,
So, you know, yeah. that-
Coincidence?
I don't think so.
No.
Which I think, which very good associate, no, it's not for me. But I mean, it could be, but because of the
You need the
tradition,
one
the preparation,
Yeah.
because that's the reference for Adonai, and I don't have the contrasting for.
That's, the reason I didn't put it in is because for me, it's like,
It's
like
like
writing
the
God and
yeah.
putting it up there, you
Yeah.
know?
No.
I wish I put it in.
And we want
Well-
judgment term up there.
Yeah.
Oh, the judge?
Yeah.
Oh, that's another one, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I should just put Diana up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Diane, yeah.
And you're kind of, appropriation starts taking words like place and making meaning for God.
Well, yeah, it's
We can't clearly put out everything like that.
Well, what's interesting
Oh,
is
no, whatever.
it starts
Dan?
out as just
Where's
Yeah.
the juice?
a way to not write.
In the refrigerator, I assume. I brought it in here. Actually, I put it in the refrigerator myself, yes.
Is someone monitoring?
It seemed like the right place to put it.
Yeah. Oh, there's none of the heat is on, okay. It seems immensely like the right place.
Thank you. Some support is always welcome.
Well, there are
All right,
other
let's-
names too.
No, there are many.
Yeah.
Let's finish up in the next minute.
Another question, whether or not you look at during the OMAC. Because it's a traditional exercise during the OMAC, you meditate on the severe oath.
No.
Which I do.
That's awesome. So as we come back, let's go ahead and take these off the wall, both because the longer they're on there, the more likely they are to take a little bit of paint with them, but also because for the next 20 minutes, as we discuss, I want to have these names and our comments just sitting right here among us as reference points for our conversation.
Well, I'm sorry, because that would have been
Yeah, I should have just claimed credit.
Yeah, right.
Of course I did. It actually had more to do with I designed this with a classmate, and so we are going to sort of compare notes.
Yeah, it's a good exercise, I like it. Yeah, I can see why we want to do that.
Let us spread these out across the tables.
That needs to really be good with individuals. Care more about getting more business than I do.
Should we flip over the tapes for the 6 weeks?
Yeah, let's do that.
Would you hand me that
Stuff here, yeah.
There you go.
Thank you.
You'll see on one of them will be prescription for Valium, on the
So before I go into the sort of guided questions that I have in mind, are there any immediate thoughts or comments on the experience so far?
No, I think it really helps sort of clarify what you think about these. When you have them up there, you have to pay attention, sort of isolating that view.
Yeah.
I had the opposite experience because I associate with many of these names depending on what's happening, and
Yeah.
it's never occurred to me to look at them all holistically as a group.
Huh.
This is the scope and variance of God.
Yeah, well, I was struck by there is a, the guy who wrote, this is from the rabbi who wrote Money from the Rock, and it's Lawrence Kushner. Yeah, who teaches the translation of the Shema that stresses, the translation runs something like, listen you who struggle with the concept of God. The God of mercy and the God of justice, they're the same God. Yeah. The idea that we have to deal with these different aspects being part of the one God.
Right,
It's part of the struggle that we have as Jews being strictly monotheists.
right. And the other thought is that as Jews, most of these are very traditional. And usually when we think of a situation we were in, especially even when we're engaging in liturgy, this concept comes to mind because it's traditional.
I think it's impressive, as much as we may knock our ancestors for some of their what seems to be rather rigid views, that they really weren't over time all that rigid. They were incredibly imaginative and insightful.
So,
Something else I noticed just bringing down, and it was something about myself, was how I would think about a concept I thought was the same but wasn't differently. Like, if you look at Adonai Savot and Malkeinu, those are two very close related concepts, but even in my own remarks on there, I thought of them very, very differently when actually distilled down.
right, I have, on a peoplehood scale, the difference between Redeemer and Savior are clear. But on an individual scale, for me,
Yeah.
they're so close. It's hard to say what situations I might imagine myself being redeemed versus saved. And I guess, and I hadn't really, even through designing this, I didn't really think about it until I went through this myself, and I finally sort of had to say, okay, saving is when I was not in the position to do it myself, because either I didn't want to, or I just couldn't. Redemption is something that, even if it's with help or without help, comes from me. And so it really forced, so I connected with your comment, Ben, because it forced me to differentiate.
Because I never thought of Savior and Redeemer as separate concepts before until I actually saw the Hebrew transliteration and realized that's referring to two separate concepts. They don't have a shared root.
Yeah. So has anyone thought about, actually taken defined time to think about approaching God in this manner before using names? And it does not necessarily Hebrew names, but just different names as lenses to God. I mean, yeah, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, this is a traditional spiritual building practice for the counting of the Omer, since it's 7 days of 7 weeks, and there are 7 lower Sephirot, which can be thought of as aspects of God in Kabbalistic thought, is to deal with the pairings that come from the second day of the first week versus the third day of the first week, and what those aspects of God refer to in terms of concepts of God, and how one can put those again, how you can work with the idea that these are the same God dealing with individual pairings through the 7 weeks.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, 30-some years ago, back when you were still living in Edgewood, we had an adult session, and Harvey Wallace and I led it. It was from Alternatives in Jewish Education that looked at all the names of God and through them tried to, you know, one of those experiential types of things. Do you?
Collection, yes.
Has your, what was different 30 years later?
Well,
Or what was the same?
I don't remember how I felt 30 years ago.
I don't remember how you felt yesterday. So one of the metaphors that is used very frequently, I actually don't know if it's used frequently, but the professors at HUC like to use it all the time in terms of theology, especially when it comes to different names of God, and that's the a giant room with an elephant and a bunch of blind people.
Yeah, the blind man.
Where, one guy walks up and has this tail and, I understand what this is, and another guy's holding the tusk and he goes, yes, I know exactly what this is, and somebody else has a trunk and somebody else has a leg, and they all think that they understand and have connected with whatever the object in the room is, but in reality it's all part of this one thing with distinct parts.
A snake, a tree.
Right.
A wall, a spear, a rope.
So
It's a Hindu story, Rick.
I thought it was.
But I use it to teach the same. I use it to teach Sfarot the same.
Yeah. So I wasn't sure if it was Buddhist or Hindu, but so that's part of what we're doing here is struggling between. First of all, we need, it's important for us to realize that we have permission. And it's not one of those things that anyone gave us permission. It's like Washington's concept of liberty. It's your government doesn't give you liberty. You automatically have it. It's a non-discussion point because it's an inherent quality in all humans. And in Judaism, the ability to relate to God in many ways has been an inherent quality, which how that plays out in the history of Judaism could be a self-contained adult study, starting with the characters in the Bible and how they relate to the biblical God, moving all the way through rabbinic and medieval understandings of God and into modern understandings of God. It is a totally consistent thing in Judaism that we are allowed to relate to God in different ways at different times. It's just a part of our religion, and for me it's a part of what makes it great. So I want to spend the next 10, maybe 15 minutes to actually talk about our own beliefs. And I want to just make it clear this is a safe place to talk. We should not feel threatened, even if we feel like our beliefs may be in a minority. Pardon me. And this is a safe place to talk, in that we can voice our hopes and concerns in this holy space, and let it really stay in this holy space and in our hearts, and not and we don't need to carry it around what other people have said with us into when we leave the space. So having said that, there's names with red, and there's nothing with all red, correct? There are a couple with all blue, only 3 with all blue. The rest have some red and some blue. So what were new revelations that people had? What were re-articulations of beliefs that people already held, or thoughts?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make it clear that if anybody says anything that they don't want published on the video, we can cut this part out.
Let's just turn it off for this
Okay.
part, actually.